when the action took place, what was the number of children in this age group up to 14? Answer: in July 42, before the action, there were over 100,000 children. Judge Rave: was there no change since the beginning of the war? Answer: before the war there were less children, less than 100,000. Judge Rave: I thought this was the number before the war started.
I want to make that quite clear. At the beginning of the war, there were Jews in Warsaw. The number was about 350,000. And children up to the age of 14, well, I think perhaps about 60 to 70,000. And then, out of all the small towns in the area, well, the population swelled up to 450,000. And there must have been more than 100,000 children then.
One more question. You said a number of times SS men and their help.
The helpers, I meant, first of all, Ukrainian fascist gangs, which helped the SS in all the extermination actions, and unfortunately also the ghetto police, which also was an instrument in the hands of the Nazi murderers. And we, the Jewish underground, regardless of creed, were against this police, just as we were against the Judenrat, against the policy of cooperating with the Nazis.
Thank you, Dr. Bermann. Dr. Bermann, did you get any help? The Jews, did they get any help during the Holocaust?
Yes, I myself was in constant touch with the Polish underground and with institutions for helping children, Polish institutions in the Aryan parts of Warsaw. And I can state that even from the point of view of aid to the fighting ghetto and from the point of view of aid to Jewish resistance, we did obtain some aid. I can't say it was massive aid. The possibilities, the opportunities, the means at the disposal of the progressive Polish underground, their opportunities were limited, their means were limited, but we did obtain aid, and I'm proud about the fact that the first revolver which we received from the anti-fascists, the Polish anti-fascists to the Jewish anti-fascist bloc, we received that revolver in my room, in the room of the Director General of Centos, just as I am proud of the fact that among the 1,000 workers of Centos, there were hundreds who were active in the underground. Later, the fighting ghetto obtained aid not once and not twice, first of all from the progressive Polish circles, from the Armia Ludowa. Even in the matter of saving children, there too I dealt with this personally to some extent. We had contacts with the Polish aid to children organizations and the progressive parties, Catholic circles as well, and a certain number, I think one could say thousands, not many thousands, but thousands of Jewish children were saved thanks to aid from these Polish organizations, these progressive and Catholic Polish organizations.
How were they saved? By transferring them to the Aryan side?
Yes, they were taken to the Aryan side, to families, to institutions. Many Polish families adopted these children, took them out of the ghetto.
Judge Halevi, did you succeed to smuggle news outside to the free world?
Yes. It was this way. When I crossed over into the Aryan quarter, that was on the 6th of September 1942, on the day when the big Umschlag, the big action began, when I heard that this was the last moment, then in the Aryan Quarter, thanks to my connections and connections established by other friends with the Polish underground, we set up a Jewish committee, a national Jewish committee underground in the Aryan Quarter. And we had a coordinating board between this Jewish National Committee with the socialist Jewish organization, the Bund. We got in touch with all the underground, all the Polish underground organizations. I was the Jewish representative with the Poles. We got in touch as well with circles, with the Armia Ludowa, the PPR, and those circles too had contacts with Armia Krajowa. We then decided to do everything we could in order to alert the world, the Jewish and non-Jewish world, and to tell what was happening in the ghettos, in the death camps, and what was happening to the Jewish people in Poland. I think we succeeded. We had certain opportunities of transmitting our cables, our reports, fairly detailed reports about our activities, about our struggle of the fighting ghetto and the other ghettos. We transmitted this to London, to Washington, and to Moscow.
When did this start, judged by President of Court?
This began in 1943, and these links were even stronger in 44, and this went on to the end. And we received cables from abroad in return, in response, from Jewish organizations.
Judge Halevi, what kind of cables?
About rescue work, about various activities connected with this tragedy of the Jewish people. I should like to add one point, that then, in those days, the days of Warsaw, of the Warsaw Ghetto, and the days of Treblinka and Auschwitz and Majdanek, I decided that one of my missions, one of my chief missions, would be the struggle against this scourge called Nazism and fascism, to their total annihilation.
Thank you, Dr. Bermann. You completed your evidence. I call upon Mr. Baruch Duvdevani.
קומוניסט ברמן, נכון?
זה דובדבני של הסוכנות? זה דובדבני של מחלקת
אני מבקש שקט.
של הסוכנות.
אני מניח שגם מר דובדבני יעדיף
I take it that
נכון מר דובדבני? תגיד, אני מצהיר בהן צדק שעדותי במשפט
I hereby affirm that my testimony in this case will be the truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth. Your name is Baruch Duvdevani.
Yes, it is.
You work for the Immigration Department of the Jewish Agency.
I do.
You have a book in your hands known The Holy Flame.
Yes.
Contains the preachings and sermons by the Rabbi of Kalmish. Tell us, how did this come into your possession, and how did you publish?
During the war years, the disciples of this sage, of this rabbi, asked me that if I reach another country, if I get to another country at the end of this Holocaust, I should try to find out whether the sage had survived and any writings. And when, after the war, I was sent by the Jewish agency to go to the camps, I became interested in the fate of the Rabbi Cronenmus Shapira. I had heard about his fate, but I did not manage to find out whether any writings remained. In 1956, I was sent by the State of Israel to Poland, and I continued to interest myself as to whether any writings had remained. I would go to the ruins in Warsaw. They were demolishing the ruins and building new homes. I visited the Jewish Historical Institute, but I could find nothing still. Then one day, a Pole brought a jar which contained some scraps of paper which he found at the site where the ghetto had stood. This jar was left there by Dr. Emanuel Ringelblum. I looked at these pages, but I still found nothing. The people of the Historical Institute helped me, but we still failed. And then one day, when I began looking more intensively, I was presented with a testament which somebody had left behind, somebody who sent it to his brother in this country, a will I found there. And when I saw that will and the date was 4 months before the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto, I was shocked and I began reading, and I saw that he had placed in this jar books which he had written during the war. This disturbed me very much, and I had no rest. And I found this book after a day or two. I found this manuscript, the manuscript of this book.
Submit the book and request the court to return it to the witness because I want him to read a few passages from that book. This is marked as Exhibit 258. Carry on, please. Do you want the book now, the Attorney General? Yes, I would like the witness to read only short passages. The late rabbi requested that his book be published. This is his will.
Yes, it is.
And these are the sermons he held and preached on Shabbat and on holidays in his synagogue.
Yes, in his synagogue and in the Schultz factory where he had been employed in forced labor as a tailor. He would be standing with the other workers and whispering to them and would be speaking to them words from the Bible, from the Torah.
As you verified, he was killed at Tabniki in Lublin.
He was.
Will you read us a number of sermons or passages from the sermons? Page 112, please. 112.
And who is the man that would not be sad to see these bodily and spiritual sufferings, whose heart will not ache to see that there are no yeshivot and no institutes of Jewish learning, and not only at this hour are the houses of God being destroyed, but this will also go on in the future, because there will be no scholars, no biblical scholars in the future generations, because they died the cruel deaths, and many had to go out and beg. And where shall we take boys who shall study the Torah if they go idle now? And some of them could not resist temptation and had to violate the Sabbath to get a scrap of food. Can we believe that those boys who went around in the marketplaces and begged for crumbs of bread on Sabbath and other days, will they return to the yeshivot after the war?
Now on page 113, there is a sermon regarding the Sedra of the week, and then there is a draft, a correction. Will you please read only those remarks at the foot of the page?
Perhaps I shall be permitted to explain for a moment. This Bible in the section Ekev, that was in the year 1941, and he speaks here, he says that people are still praying and studying the Bible, and he is encouraging them. In the year 1943, then he writes the following remark, which I shall now read. The above remarks were written in the year 1941, when although sufferings were bitter and terrible, as can be seen in what is written above, nevertheless, we could still write and speak about it, and we could take care of the survivors and lament the future. How will all these houses of worship and study be rebuilt? And we could devote energies to studies. Not so in the year 1942, because the Jewish sacred communities were almost wiped out completely, and they had to work bitter labor like in the days of old in Egypt. There is no way to lament about this. No heart has remained that can be urged and encouraged to continue working. And what sacrifice is required to keep the Sabbath and all the other sacred injunctions?
Thank you. Will you please open page 132? This is the sermon held on Shabbat after the feast of the Pentecost, after Shavuot.
Again, the previous sentence must be read, otherwise it would not be understood. He writes there, the rabbi, that when he had spoken in 1941, and he was a historian by profession, he says, such suffering, such tortures as occurred in 1941, the Jews had known in their history when the temple was destroyed, and so on in other periods. But then he writes in 1943 the following remark: only the troubles which we experienced until 1942, this had occurred in the history before. But these horrible and cruel and strange this, the innovations of these terrible animals, these monstrous murderers, which began in 1942, as far as I know, the history, the sacred and secular history of the Jewish people, there was not the like of these horrible punishments. And may God have mercy on us and save us. Eve of Sabbath, 19th of September, 1942. 43, I'm sorry.
Will you please turn to page 139, and will you please explain the remarks? This was written for the Shabbat of Hanukkah, of the Feast of the Candles.
This was the eve of the Sabbath, the 18th of the month of Kislev, 1943. This was the Sabbath of the Festival of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. This is more or less the same. Perhaps it is another page. Page 140 at the bottom. It was learned from the late rabbi, it must have been his father, that even the plainest man in Israel is prepared to give his life for God at the time of trial. And then he writes, therefore, if each and every one of us had known that we did not trespass, we did not do any evil, we are not being persecuted for any other reason than because we are Jews, devout Jews, devoted to the sacred Bible, and these people are not only trying to extinguish the sacred spark in our life, but are also, if only this had been the case, then our belief and our devotion would have been strengthened.
Will you please turn to page 169, the Sedra of Remember What Amalek Did to You, and read the large letters.
It is extremely difficult because the sufferings are more than we can bear. May God have mercy on us. But when many people of Israel are being dragged alive and burned alive and killed and murdered only because they are Jews, then we too must withstand this trial and with devotion overcome ourselves and be strengthened in our belief in God Almighty.
Last paragraph 185 to the Sedra of the law, Chukat.
Israel's eternity in this world can be only through the sons. Therefore, the persecutors, the first persecutor, Pharaoh, seized the infants and threw every firstborn, every Jewish child into the river. This was always the same. Those who hated Jews always were cruel above all to the children of Israel. Sometimes they killed them or made them convert their religion, as we have learned from history from ages past. May God have mercy on us. And as unfortunately we see today that on top of all that cruelty and horrible tortures and killings, the most cruel tortures are those experienced by those little sons and daughters. Alas, alas.
Last passage on the following page in the black lettering.
And indeed,
read slowly, please.
And indeed, it is a miracle how the world stands after all these cries which go up to heaven. We know from past history of 10 people who were killed, and there came a voice out of heaven, if I should hear another voice, I shall turn the entire world into water. But now, sweet children, angels, they are the greatest martyrs of Israel, who are killed only because they are Jews, because they are even superior to the angels. Their cries fills the entire space of the world, and the world does not turn into the water. It continues existing as though nothing had happened.
Thank you. Will you please hand the book to the court? That is all. Dr. Savatius, any questions?
Ich habe keine Frage.
I have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Duvdevani.
Irrelevant.
אני קורא לגברת רבקה
I
קופר.
call upon Mrs. Rivka Kuper.
Do you speak Hebrew? Judge Landau, please place your right hand on the Bible and say, I swear by God that my testimony in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Your full name, please.
Rivka Kuper.
With one P, Kuper with one P. Mr. Hausner, are you a member of the Maayan Tzvi collective village?
Yes.
Was your previous name Libeskind? You were the wife of Adolph Libeskind,
yes,
known as Dolef Libeskind, who was the leader of the Jewish underground in Krakow.
Yes, and the organizer of that underground.
During the Second World War, when it broke out, you were in Krakow, right?
Yes. I went through all the ghetto procedure.
Please tell us briefly, the court has heard this before, tell us briefly what the transition to the ghetto looked like in Krakow, the capital of the government general.
This was done in stages. The first stage was when we were all in our own houses, in the homes we had from before the war. They started with searches, marking the houses, marking enterprises, Jewish enterprises. The instructions to wear the yellow badge. We had a blue on white, a Magen David. Later came instructions that only Jews who obtain a certificate, an Ausweis, will be permitted to stay on in Krakow. The others must leave. And then the first deportations of Krakow Jews began eastwards towards Lublin. The first groups, we received news from them. They were sad news because they were sent penniless, they were robbed on their way and had no means of making a living, but they were still alive. The second stage began with the declaration of setting up a ghetto in Krakow. This was early in 1941. It began actually at the end of 1940, but the entry into the ghetto was in March 1941, when only 30,000 Jews remained out of 60,000 in Krakow and 80,000 at the beginning of the war. Of course, the ghetto was overcrowded.
What quarter was set up?
A residential quarter behind the Wisla. This was always the quarter of the poor. The streets, there were old, dilapidated houses, wooden structures about to fall to pieces. The population was crammed, 3 to 4 families into a one-room apartment with a small kitchen. And of course, epidemics broke out early, especially amongst the children. It was difficult to keep any sanitary conditions with all the efforts done by our doctors and by the social workers.
You set up an underground by the youth movement. You were a member of a Zionist youth movement?
Yes, a Zionist movement. The youth, from the very beginning, the moment they forbade a Jewish boy to go to school and continue his studies, it was our aim to get the youth together and to guard this youth. First of all, we continued the studies in small groups, in rooms. The teachers, the school teachers of Hebrew schools, and there were such teachers in Krakow because it was a very organized community, rich with institutions of culture. The teachers at first volunteered to teach and work, but they disappeared quickly. They were deported. And then we continued, the adults, to teach the younger people. We also continued the framework of our movement, and all other movements continued in their own framework. They used to gather on Shabbat evening, on holidays, continued their studies of the Bible, their studies of Jewish history. We tried to help the children forget what was going on the street, because there was horror and terror. It was impossible to go out onto the street without endangering one's life. There was the taking off the streets to work into unknown directions. And after beatings up, a Jew would be thrown onto a truck. He would return at night or after a number of days, or not come back at all. And when he would come back, he needed a hospital in most cases. There were attacks. There were bursting into houses. There was robbery and plunder of everything of value. People were attacked on the streets. The religious life stopped almost altogether right at the outstart, because all Block got used to the idea that we had candles lit for Shabbat night. We had no bread, but we did manage to get hold of candles. We fast on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur. We did not eat bread at Auschwitz on Pesach. We collected and we handed over our rations in exchange for potatoes, so that we could avoid eating bread on Pesach.
Let's go back to Krakow. The youth movements had organized an underground under the command of Adolph Libeskind-Dolek, Libeskind, your husband.
We very early learned, after the first deportations, we heard rumors about the direction of those deportation trains. And then we came to a decision that we cannot go and be slaughtered like sheep. We cannot stand with folded arms and look on as our parents or children, brothers and sisters, were taken away from us and not do anything about it. Of course, it is easy to relate now, but it was very difficult at the time. The first thing we did, after we learned the aim of those deportations, were to send warnings to all Jews. Our girls who had any way or means by their Aryan look to leave the ghetto would go out of the ghetto, get in touch with other ghettos. I did that as well. We used to come to ghettos and get in touch with the people we know. The danger was great. It was dangerous during the war to approach a stranger, but through those acquaintances we sent word to everybody. We sent word where those deportation trains headed for. And there is no difference if Jews come to those deportations voluntarily.
May I direct you a little bit with my questions? I understand that you had organized also an underground network in the entire area in Western Galicia.
We had certain concentration points in Częstochow, in Tarnów, in Rudnik, and other places, in Beradom. We worked from Krakow, but we also had emissaries running between Warsaw and Krakow.
And you equipped yourself with forged papers?
We dealt with the fabrication of forged papers, enabling people to leave the ghetto, and secondly, to move about. We prepared papers which permitted them to move on trains, and when we learned about a deportation, for instance in Krakow, we used to supply papers to enable people who were about to be deported, to enable them to come to the ghettos. Usually girls would take those papers to enable people to escape to Krakow and other places. Hela Rufeisen. She was an emissary and a contact for Dolek in ghetto Warsaw, in the Warsaw ghetto.
Do you know the book Justina's Diary?
I know the book, and I know the woman who wrote it. I know the man who wrote it. Gustav Davidson Drenger was his name.
Where did she write that book?
Where did she wrote it in the prison at Montolupe on toilet paper stolen for her by all those who sat with her.
Did she survive?
Yes, stolen for her toilet paper. It was also difficult to write on this paper, and while she was writing, there was a whole conspiracy to hide her.
How was the book found and how was it published?
These papers were found by one of our comrades. Part of those, a number of those girls were executed. Others were sent to Auschwitz, and some of them are alive in Israel. The girls, before they left prison, Justina escaped. She organized an escape from prison, together with girls who were to be transported for extermination. She even succeeded to escape and was active until the end of 1943. On that day, our young men organized an escape from a men's prison, and her husband, Shimshon Drenger, one of the heads of the underground, also succeeded in escaping. They met and were active in the Vishnitz forests. They also published a paper calling for an uprisal, calling upon the Poles and the Jews. It was called Hechalutz Unto You. The last publication was at the end of 1943. They were caught and executed, both of them.
And that was the Polish Anne Frank, really.
These papers were found by a comrade. They were hidden in the frame of the door, in the cell.
What frame did you mean?
Behind the wooden frame. Not all the notes were found. Therefore, a few chapters are missing, especially the story about the most serious action.
Mr. Hausner, I shall get to this operation. Now, you were arrested in the middle of November 1942.
At the end of November 42.
Yes, the end of November. After he had returned from a mission by the underground headquarters to the ghetto of Rudin.
Correct, but to our place of concentration, I was sent there to try and renew the contact.
Who interrogated you when you were under detention?
2 Gestapo men, whose names I remember, Kunde and Kerner. There was a 3rd man, but I can't remember his name. These 2 were very known figures, and whenever they appeared in the ghetto, meant evil.
Were there beatings and was there torture during the interrogation?
Yes, I was beaten up badly, but I was not unconscious.
When were you released from prison?
From prison, I was not released. I was transferred to Auschwitz, and I stayed in Auschwitz until the end of November 44, and then 5 or 6 additional camps, always for forced labor, and in many places we tried to sabotage. In Auschwitz as well, there was an underground. We did not obey orders all the time in Auschwitz. We tried to spoil and sabotage wherever we could. I point it out because the place of the uprisal in the history of the Holocaust is small, but the attempt to revolt and to resist was above.
What was your type of labor which you did at Auschwitz?
I was demolishing houses.
Demolition of houses?
I pulled down houses. I drained swamps. I stood in water up to my knees. And then in camp, I was caught because we kept up a contact with our young men. And for smuggling news, then I was transferred to a punishment commando. In Auschwitz, I had a special uniform with a red patch on my back. I was in jail within the camp. We used to go out to the most difficult labor. We were to rise at 3 in the morning in the cold, stand in the snow, and then we were returned after sundown, accompanied by dogs, and if anybody lagged behind, the dog was set upon him. Our food rations were less than that given to the other inmates of the camp. And then I was saved by my friends who smuggled me out into a transport sent to Breichenbach.
Mr. Hausner, now when you were in prison, you learned that your husband Dolek died in an underground operation.
Yes. Prisoners reached those who took part in the action of the Christmas 42. This was one of the known and big actions for which we prepared a long time, and in order to implement our plan, we obtained arms and prepared bombs to issue pamphlets and leaflets. And on Christmas night, our comrades in groups approached a cafe, a German cafe, patronized by Nazi officers, and threw a bomb into the place. Tens of Germans were killed and wounded.
And as you heard, there was an exchange of shots with the Germans, and the shelter where Dolek was hiding was discovered. Yes?
Before they found his hideout, they found the hideout of the comrades who took part in this action and came back there. And then after they were caught, all of them, they came to Dolek's hideout. This was the hideout of the chief command, where they had arms, money, a duplicating machine for leaflets and other materials. There were uniforms we used. And there, when they were attacked, there were two comrades, Dolek and Yuda Tenenbaum. They were surrounded and defended themselves only after an exchange of shots. And Germans were killed as well. The two committed suicide. They were not killed and they were not caught. They committed suicide with their last bullets. But the underground did not cease. Comrades remained, and they passed into the Aryan district. The aim was to set up hideouts, to work in forests, and to enable Jews to hide. because they still hoped that the war will end, and the aim was to save at least someone to relate our story.
Judge Landau, Dr. Savatius, have you any question of this witness? Answer, no, I have no questions.
What year were you born? 1920.
Judge Landau, thank you,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Kuper. Mr. Hausner, I call now on Mrs. Bathsheva Rufeisen.
שקט.
מחזירה אותן.
בבקשה, שימי את ידך הימנית על התנ"ך.
Please place your right hand on the Bible and say, I swear by God
שעדותי
that
במשפט
my
זה
testimony in this trial
תהיה אמת,
will be the truth,
כל האמת
the whole truth,
ורק האמת.
and nothing but the truth.
שמך
Your name, please.
Hela Bathsheva Rufeisen.
Hela Bathsheva.
You're a member of the village of Bustan Galil.
Correct.
When the Second World War broke out, you were in Krakow. Mrs. Rufeisen, you may sit down while testifying.
Thank you. גם שלי. You did not enter into the ghetto and acted as contact and liaison between the ghetto and the outside for the underground, active at the time. You acted as liaison between Dolek, Libeson in Krakow and the underground inside. Yes, I did.
Mr. Hausner, what were your instructions which you received from the underground in Krakow?
I came to Krakow during a period after the deportations from Ghetto Warsaw began. My mission was, in the name of my movement, and to contact the direction in Krakow, the administration in Krakow. In Warsaw, the action was in full speed. People, Jews, ran to and fro from the large ghetto to the small ghetto, not knowing where one could go on living a little longer. Our group at the time was evacuated because the even numbers of Nalewski Street were cut off from the ghetto.
Mr. Hausner, you mean the side where all the even-numbered houses were?
We remained without a roof to our heads, and it was difficult to find housing. We found a cellar, and with us was a paralyzed young girl whom we took out of hospital because hospitals were the first to be taken to those actions. I was hopeless. No roof and almost no food. The fighting organization was at the beginning and the starting.
Mr. Hausner, where did your missions take you for the underground?
In the name of the underground, I went from Warsaw to Krakow and from Krakow to Warsaw. Besides, I also went to other places. I went to Rzeszów, to hire an apartment and to hold this as a point of escape and hiding.
You went to Sanok.
I went to Sanok and to call upon men to
You go
join
to
the
Lvov.
underground. And to Lvov, to get in touch with Jews in the ghetto and to search for a way of rescue, a way to
You transferred
pass
arms
into
and
Hungary.
documents, Aryan documents, work passes, and you gave all of these documents to Dolek Liebeskind.
Yes, correct. I smuggled papers into Warsaw, many papers. I did not always succeed. I was caught once with the papers, but I succeeded in destroying the papers. I smuggled arms successfully.
You smuggled the dynamite which was used for manufacturing the bombs used for the attack on the Tsiganova cafe in Krakow.
I did.
Where were you when the underground attack on the cafe Tsiganova took
During
place?
that time, I was in Rzeszów, waiting for young men who went out into the woods to act, and I was supposed to wait for them there.
And there you learned about the death of the
A
underground men.
messenger came and told me what happened. He also told me that Laban was caught and that in his clothes they found papers with the address. With his address, it seems that he was registered on
Laban
that
was
street.
Abraham Leibovich. That is the name mentioned by Yitzhak Zuckerman. What was Zuckerman's name, underground name?
Antek was his name.
You continued working as an envoy until 43
Yes.
when you were taken out of
Correct.
Warsaw. What happened to you then?
At that time, I came to Warsaw to obtain some money. And then in Krakow, they caught Shimon Drenga and Laban, and we had news that we could save them by paying ransom. We had no money. There were a few people from the underground. I went to Warsaw and succeeded to obtain this money. And then, on my way out, I left with a group of Jewish laborers, and when we reached the Wacha, to the guards,
Utlandau, you mean the guard, yes?
it transpired that the guard was especially cruel, and they all started retreating, moving backwards, because everybody had something on him, some food or something. I was first, and he came up searching my body, and he found my identity card on my back. And then the doubts started if I was Jewish or not.
What kind of policeman was that, did
A
you say?
German policeman. Last moment, I succeeded in destroying an address of Żobrowska, and she was at the time at Auschwitz, and I was supposed to get hold of some help for her. I succeeded in pushing it into the oven.
What stove, you mean?
There was an iron stove burning
Where was that?
in the guardroom. In the guardroom. And the moment I was arrested, and a woman policeman, I asked her that she take over the large sum of money. I didn't want it to fall into Aryan hands. She was afraid, but after a minute, a young man who was supposed to clean the hut came into the room, and I pushed the money into his pocket and left. Then I was left alone with the Germans and their doubt whether I was Jewish or not.
And you ran away towards sunrise.
Before morning came, I escaped the ghetto. There was an action about to be taken in the ghetto, and I was afraid that my comrades who saw me off on my way, I was afraid that they would try to do something in order to save me. and I did not want them to endanger themselves and that the action would be accelerated. I decided that I had to escape at all costs. At 4 in the morning, I succeeded to escape into the ghetto, and the place was all lit up. 4 German policemen shot after me and 2 Poles. I was hit in the leg, but I succeeded in running into the ghetto back to my comrades.
You took part in the uprising, in the ghetto uprising,
Yes.
and on the 8th of May 1943, together with an underground group, you crossed through the canalization sewage canals and got into the Aryan quarter. You hid for some time, and then you were sent with a group of Jews, foreign citizens, to Bergen-Belsen, and there you stayed until you were freed by the American army. Judge Landau, how did you get into this group of the foreign citizens?
Very simple. I was broken. My spirit, in spirit I was broken after I saw the burning of the Warsaw ghetto. No one of those dear to me was alive any longer. I had nothing to fight for. There was no hope that I would be taken to the woods early. This I still wanted.
This was not my question. How were you attached to this group?
I entered and I was taken in by them.
Fine. Dr. Savatius, any
Ich
questions?
habe keine Frage.
Answer, no questions of this witness. Mr. Landau, thank you, Mrs. Rufeisen. Mr. Hausner, these are our witnesses for today. With permission of court, I shall now present some documents. I did not want to interrupt the chronological order here, so perhaps some of the documents refer to witnesses who spoke yesterday, others refer to witnesses who gave testimony today. Our first document is 1113. Mr. Landau, perhaps, sir, you could sit down. You can do it sitting down. Thank you, sir. Document 1113 is a complaint by the security police in the town of Przemyśl against a military officer, a German army officer, because he prevented the policeman from using a bridge over the Sun River and thereby sabotaged an action of deporting Jews from the Przemyśl ghetto. Judge Landau, this will be Exhibit T 260. The next document in this connection is 1114, our number 1114. The police headquarters are referring the complaint. Judge Landau, please quieten the court. Those who wish to leave, please do so quickly. Mr. Hausner, police headquarters refer the complaint, the same complaint, to the OKW, the Chief Supreme Headquarters of the Wehrmacht, of the German Army. That will be Exhibit T 261. Your Honor will please notice that they are speaking about SS Obersturmbannführer Wirth, who was the connecting link, who was the liaison man near the army headquarters. It says here that there was almost an exchange of fire between the army and the police, and only thanks to the caution and the reserve of the policemen who did not want to open fire on the army, this did not take place. The Reich authorities were so angry about this, so that Himmler eventually told the Reichsleiter, told Martin Bormann, that after the war was over, he would take that officer, Dr. Albert Betten, who was responsible for that so-called sabotage. He would put him to trial before a party tribunal and would request that the man be expelled from the party. Apparently, during the war, even Hitler could not touch a Wehrmacht officer, even though he had help. This officer had